Hello and welcome to the Recreation to Recreation podcast, the show where we explore the stories of people who have turned the activity that they love into positive change for our world. My name is Jen, and I'll be your sidekick on this adventure as we treasure hunt for gems of insight and wisdom while exploring the planet with our inspiring guests. For today's adventure, we're heading to New Zealand and beyond with John to explore his world of awareness, reconnection, and creative adventure. Hi, John.
Hi, Jen. How's it going?
I'm good, thanks. How are you today?
I'm super. Lovely, beautiful, sunny day here in New Zealand.
That was actually going to be my first question. I love to always ask, where are you? What's it like there? Just get us situated in your world.
I am at my mother's house in New Plymouth, New Zealand, in the region of Taranaki. It's a beautiful blue, clear day outside, and I'm just having a few quiet days from off the roads with my mum, which has been very pleasant.
For sure. So before we get into it, John, I usually start these episodes with a little bit of a Q&A. So I call them my weird and wonderful questions. They really don't have anything to do with anything, although I find them quite entertaining. So hopefully you're okay with a quick fire round.
Well, good. Long as you're entertained, that's fine. I don't know what the listeners will feel like after this, but go for it.
They don't really have a choice, but I hope they enjoy them too. All right, so let's start with the first one. What's your favorite road trip song or album?
Oof. I think probably at this particular point in time, Sweet Home Alabama, because I literally drove through Alabama. I drove from Nashville down to New Orleans earlier this year, and I was so excited about being able to drive through Alabama and sing it. I must have done it about 4 times on repeat, just singing from the top of my voice as I was driving along. And so, at the moment, that's top of the range.
Awesome. Perfect. What do you think 18-year-old you would have thought about what you're doing now?
He wouldn't have really had a clue, I don't think, because I mean, I didn't have a master plan. I didn't really know where I was sort of going. I just sort of went with the flow, and I had no idea. I still really don't know where I'm heading. I just sort of go with the flow, and so I think probably would have been optimistic, but really would never in my wildest dreams have figured out that I'd be where I am now.
What's one piece of advice that you've never forgotten?
Oh, crikey. The one that sticks in my mind a bit at the moment, a mate of mine said to me, some people make choices that give themselves more choices, in terms of how you explain your life and what direction it might go in. You don't stay wedded or in a particular sort of approach and a way of life. You've open to opportunities when they come to you, and you have the ability to actually take them rather than going, oh, damn it, I'm locked into something and I can't do it. So that's resonated with me in the last few years, because I think it kind of summed up where I am, because I haven't really ever had a master plan. I've just sort of gone with the flow, and when opportunities have come up, I've been in a position where I've been able to take advantage of them rather than to be able to say no. And then that's influenced where I've actually gone in my life, because I've been open to opportunity.
Adventure ready. Love that.
Well, it's evolved into adventure. I wouldn't say there was ever adventure ready when I first left New Zealand. I guess that was when I went off on my, for my own tales of adventure back in when I was 25 years old. And up until that point, I just sort of, floated through life. But that's definitely become the feature now.
If you had an extra hour of free time per day, what would you do?
Sleep.
You know what? Honesty is the best policy.
At this stage of where I am in this year of what I'm doing, sleep is so high on my radar. I just don't seem to get enough of it, and I just I've been sleeping so well for the last few days here at my mum's, and I've been going, oh, I wish I could do more of this.
Totally fair. Would you rather be too cold or too hot?
Too hot, I think. I think my preference is hot over cold.
And which movie do you think has the best soundtrack?
Oh, gee, there's quite a few, really. Um, the bizarrely, the 1984 version of the film Dune, that's scored by Toto, was pretty cool. You know, there's some of Quentin Tarantino's films. They've got great scores to them as well. Yeah, no, too many to choose from.
I know it's a tough
Many,
question.
too many to choose from. There's, yeah, yeah. Because I've made films in the past. I'm always listening to songs, and I'm thinking, oh, I so want to put that in a film, you know. And I've got it there's a song by Armand Van Helden, which was, you know, when I was thinking about songs for this podcast that you asked me about, this was one that was in there, and it's just a dance track called My, but it just makes me want to get up and do something or race. And I always wanted to use it in a film sequence to, like, you know, when the protagonist is on the run trying to get to somewhere, or they're, you know, it's up against time or something like this. So yeah, there's always songs that you hear and you think that'd be brilliant for this situation.
Absolutely. And I look forward to exploring a little bit more about the filmmaking for sure, because that's how we met.
Indeed. Indeed it was.
Well, I'm not going to fast forward because I want to go all the way back, if that's okay with you. I
Sure.
love to start these episodes with a bit of an origin story. So, where did life begin for you? What did that look like? What was childhood like? And what were you passionate about growing up?
Came onto this planet way, way back in 1972 in little old New Plymouth, New Zealand. You know, my parents sort of grew up in the region of Taranaki, which is on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand. A very pretty place. We have a mountain in the middle of, right smack in the middle of our province. And it's a beautiful mountain called Mount Taranaki.
Mm.
And it sort of defines a lot of our, you know, who we are as a province. And it's such a beautiful mountain that it even doubled for Mount Fuji in the Tom Cruise film The Last Samurai.
That is a
So
good like pub quiz fact.
we were known as Nakiwood for Taranaki and Hollywood being mixed together. So when you see that, if you ever watch the film The Last Samurai again, you know that it's not actually Mount Fuji,
Good
it's
to
Mount
know.
Taranaki. Yeah.
Good to
Yeah.
know.
I grew up here, family, cousins, uncles, and aunties, all in the vicinity, grandparents, and just had a pretty sweet New Zealand childhood. Really, you know, this sport and, you know, life is pretty simple. You're playing out in the street, and, you know, you get called in by your mum when it's dinner time, and all that sort of malarkey that sort of seems to have changed in, you know, current state of affairs. You went to school, had my mates, very much into sport. You know, my schooling was always a little up and down. Sometimes I was on fire and really enthused, and other times I was less enthused, as my mum would say. Yeah, there was definitely times where I loved school and I was doing really, really well, and others where I had lost interest. Primary school, intermediate, high school, I didn't shine in any particular way. You know, I was just pretty much an average student, doing lots of activities and enjoying life, I guess, as best as one could. In terms of life-changing events, there was nothing ever too dramatic, you know, and there was a very quintessential Kiwi upbringing. And all the places in the world that I've been, New Zealand is such a lovely place as a kid to
Mm.
grow up. We only look out and we see the rest of the world. And I didn't even leave New Zealand until I went to Australia. I think I was 16. The next country that I went to was the UK, and that was when I was 25. We always looked abroad and saw the world on the outside and saw it on the news, but you never actually experienced it. Whereas most kids these days have been to 20 countries before they're 10, it seems to be. I got friends' babies that have been to more countries than I had, and they're only 10 months old. New Zealand, fantastic place. It still is. It's a great place to come. I love coming home to visit because it's just got a bit of everything here, and you never needed anything else because we had it literally all here on our back doorstep. Rivers, mountains, beaches. You know, you can, and in our problems, you can be on the snowboarding, and within an hour you can be surfing in the sea, you know. So it's a pretty amazing place.
I'm curious, was there some kind of pull towards adventure at some point that meant that you craved to go elsewhere?
I remember my last year of school, the sort of counselor or somebody sort of said to you, what are you going to do next year? I have no idea. What's everybody else doing? And they go, they're going, a lot of them are going to go to university. And I went, well, okay, I'll go to university then, should I? So off I went. I made a mess in my first year being there away from home in Wellington. I learned an important lesson about the amount of work that you needed to do at university. So I knuckled down. I got my degree. I then got a job, and I got a couple of years experience, and I was working as a bean counter. I was an accountant when I first started.
Wow.
And it was like, my father had a business. He was in footwear. He made jandals, which you guys will call flip-flops. My upbringing, I used to work in his factory, so I always got an exposure to business, small operations and so on, but a mixture of things. And he sort of introduced me to pieces of it, when I probably didn't even realize it, but had me doing little car boot sales, selling his jandals and everything. So I was learning commercial business sort of skills through life, and he guided me in that direction. And so I just went into business, really, commerce, because I thought, well, it'll be a useful skill set to have, even if I don't know exactly what I want to do. I don't think any 18-year-old in the world has really got an idea of what they want to do for the rest of their life. And our system asks you to make that call, and you're like, oh, shit. And everybody thinks there's so much, you have to get it right. Mm-hmm. And I think I've learned is you don't. It's one time where you make your best call, you go with it, but be open to that could change. And I'm on to about my fourth different career now, so it does prove that decision wasn't final, but it was actually a smart move on my part, because commerce gave me a really good business skill set that I figured I'd be really transferable. I was working as an accountant, and then all my mates were starting to go overseas. There's sort of two parts to the New Zealand psyche. There's the one Kiwis that are quite happy in New Zealand, love it here, and don't really have a desire to explore overseas. And then the other half want to go off on their, what we call our big OE, which is our overseas experience, where we all leave the country and go and explore. Often the main path to that is to the UK, because we had a 2-year, which is now a 3-year working holiday visa. We have the same thing with Australia, the same thing with Canada. Go there and work and experience it so you can survive. All my mates were heading over to the UK, and so inevitably I sort of followed. The seeds of exploration and adventure had been planted from various things in my youth, with my father traveling a lot for work around Asia. My auntie did her 2-year OE in the early 80s and came back and subjected the family to a ridiculously long slideshow of her entire 2 years. I can remember being both bored, senseless, but also, realizing that some of those seeds were planted. Curiosity, right? What's out there in that world? And so, when it came to that sort of, I was 25, my mates were already over there. I was like, right, I'm ready. I'm keen to go now and have a change. And so I left at 25, rolled up into the UK, just had such fun. For the first 2 years were a blur of the working holiday visa. I knew that I didn't want to go. I got the bug for exploration and adventure. I discovered that I suffered from eternal wanderlust. I wanted to see it all. So I stayed. I did a couple of years, and I was still working in finance at this sort of stage. This was now the early 2000s, and I got sponsored, and I was able to stay in the UK and work from there, which was a game changer. That was a sliding door moment that I could have easily, if I hadn't have been able to get that visa to stay working there, I probably would have ended up back in New Zealand at 27. My life would have gone in a quite different direction.
Yeah, and how does it make you feel when you think about moments like that and times like that?
Oh, no, I mean, it just feels like it was meant to happen. It just was a logical approach. I mean, I remember very early in my 2-year visa realizing that I loved being here and exploring the world and going to different countries and different cultures, that I wanted to stay. So I was actively working to try and find a solution from as soon as possible. And I had all sorts of ideas that I was bounding around to try and make it happen until eventually I found the solution. There's always a solution out there if you look hard enough.
I think this is actually a really cool opportunity to talk about a little bit of a culture happening around the 9 to 5 and thing. When I was living in the UK, there was a whole movement across London, especially called Escape the City. What's been your journey and relationship with work, balancing with the adventures that you've been on? I'm just curious about how that's worked over the years.
Sure. Yeah, look, I mean, I arrived in the UK. It was all about having a good time. Traveling, working was secondary. It was, you wanted to have a good job. I would always sort of recommend to people before they move that they go with a skill and they go with some experience, because it will translate into greater earning potential when you're in that location, which gives you more opportunities. So, I had a good job. I was earning pretty good money. I was able to, work and travel, which was perfect, and I did that for the first couple of years. Then I found a way to stay, and that was the game changer, because then I was able to stay there earning pounds. Career was progressing at the same time. Was able to continue an adventurous lifestyle that just started to grow. It was early days then. It was at first, from sort of 10 years that I was overseas, I'd got my British citizenship, changed from just being an accountant into sort of project finance roles. So there'd been an evolution there. And I'd been doing lots of weekend journeys, go somewhere, anywhere new, cool little random trips where you just sort of say yes to stuff. And so there wasn't really a structure to it, but it was just living life and enjoying it and going, you know what? I'm only 30. I don't need to worry about the future. There's a long, long way away. You have relationships and you sort of hit that window where all your friends are getting married and they're having babies, and you're thinking, do I follow that sort of path? And I did 10 years of that through until about 2008. And I'd been through the sort of sliding door moment of, do I marry this girl that I'm seeing or do I not? And I didn't feel comfortable. It didn't feel right. So I didn't, and I sort of was, I remember sitting homeless during the GFC. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anywhere to live. I was house sitting my cousin's place, and I was saving my pennies because I was broke, because the work wasn't there all of a sudden. What had been pretty sweet lifestyle up until there, I had to sort of tighten the belts for a while. And fortunately, I had a little bit of savings that I was able to rely on. If you don't have a little bit of a buffer, that removes your flexibility. And a lot of people, if they don't have that and they're living week to week, then they're forced into taking jobs or doing things that they might not necessarily do. So that was always having some little bit of cash buffer in the back pocket. It didn't have to be much, but just enough to buy yourself some time. It's a key learning I got out of that particular period. After that sort of GFC crisis, I was like, right, I need to have a bigger pot. If I wanted to not work for a year or two type of thing, I could go to Southeast Asia and I could tighten the belt and I could live and I could have some choices. So I've always had that buffer since then. That has given me a lot of flexibility that I didn't have to work if I didn't want to. Going through that sort of phase and trying to figure out who I was and what I was going to do. If something didn't feel 100% right, I didn't sort of necessarily follow that path, whereas I think some people go, well, this is what you're meant to do in life. You follow these things and these, like everybody else does it, so I'll do it too. And that never really sat comfortably with me. So unless I was 100% committed to something, I wouldn't really chase it.
There's a lot of us that maybe at different periods of time in our lives, we do feel that sort of intuition or that understanding of like, this is not for me. And I think learning what you don't want and what you don't want to do is just as important as learning what you do. I'm wondering, is that something that you always felt like you could really trust yourself to make those decisions? Or is that something that you built over time?
Built over time. Trust in my gut and my understanding, making some calls. My father would when he was no longer able to speak due to his illness, he would text things. And I remember us going for a drive once, and we were talking about my sort of track record and with the ladies and career decisions and things like that. And he just said one word. He just said gun shy. I'd procrastinate or I'd avoid making the tough call, or I didn't sort of jump in and have a go with some faith that it would all turn out all right, which is what I think a lot of people do in life. for like years realized that, if you're going to go for something, if you only aim for what you can see possible, you often limit yourself. If you can aim for something miles further that you don't see what the solution or the answer or the end point is, you'll always make it. Even if you only made it halfway to that stage, it would be a country mile further than what you might have done if you restricted yourself to what you saw was possible. And every time I've been in that situation and I've taken that punt, it's always exceeded by miles what you would have thought imaginable. And generally, 95% of the time has always been positive.
And I think that is such an important thing for us to reflect on, is that, the only way you get confident in trusting your gut is by choosing things and then living them out and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
That's really just, it's, choose and repeat. And I like to think that there are no mistakes when it comes to life. Everything has consequences, but there's also huge lessons in every single choice that we make. So it's just nice to hear someone reflect on how it is to trust your gut, and how it's not necessarily something that comes easily a lot of the time.
No. Look, I followed a fairly traditional path to many of my peers until I got to about almost 40. I guess you go to school, you get educated, you get out of school, you get some experience, you go overseas. For 10 years overseas, from 25 to 35, I was enjoying my life. I was having a great time. I was traveling, I was having relationships, I was doing all the norms. And it got to like the mid 30s, and it was like, okay, do you settle down? Do you not settle down? Do you get married? Do you have a family? Those sorts of big questions started to become more prevalent. And I was in a relationship with a really cool girl, and I was like, oh, what do I do? Which way do we go here? And I ultimately decided to go down the line of not staying with her, and we split up. And then I had a period after that of not really knowing what I was doing, and that all happened at the same time as the GFC crisis. So there was, all of a sudden, I didn't have a job and had a lot of time to think, an awful lot of time to think about where I go. And I was in a little bit of a transition period for a few years where I just didn't really know. Got through that. It wasn't life-threatening or anything like that, which in so many other parts of the world, people, living breadline, threats of war and other things like that, we don't have to worry about where I was living anyway. But it was coming towards out of that phase is when I started to, think a little bit about it, and that's when some of the changes happened to where I am now as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to hear, firstly, I do want to move on to some of those, I guess, that light bulb moment or that epiphany moment when things changed for you. But I'd like to reflect a little bit on that transition period. And I'm just wondering if there's people listening who are going through some kind of a transition where they've made maybe some difficult choices, and they also feel like maybe their life is falling apart in the way that it does sometimes to be remade and recreated. What were some of the things that helped you during that time of transition? Were there any sort of like tools or practices that you used? Or was it just a lot of thinking? And that's okay too.
Yeah, at that particular point in time, there probably wasn't anything specific. I'd done some personal development stuff back in the early 2000s. I did the Landmark Forum, which was ask you questions and you learn a little bit about yourself. It was just a sort of, I guess, a non-religious sort of meaning of life kind of course, which I did for about a year, and I got some really cool things out of it at that time. But no, I didn't really have a purpose. That probably just lasted a year or two, back into some work, and then I got some money back behind me. I've got some options. What shall I do?
Okay. And then what did you do?
Wow, how did it unfold? I think 2010, I was at the Football World Cup in South Africa supporting New Zealand. It was only the
Mm.
second time we'd ever qualified for the World Cup. So we went, right, we got to go. Doesn't matter. This may never happen ever again, type of thing, like that. And because I was a kid of 10 in 1982 when All Whites, New Zealand football team, made it to Spain. And it was like epic. I still remember it as a kid. I was football mad in a rugby mad country. Strong emotional tie to that with the football. So we went bunch of mates, all football mates. We went out. We had such a great time because New Zealand did so well. So while I was in South Africa, my boss texted me and said, "Yeah, the project is off. No rush. Don't come back in a hurry." And, oh shit! All right, okay, no worries. All right, I've got a bit of free time on my hands, and I was back in London, and I was sort of like, "Wow, what do I do now?" And my cousin from Canada, who lived in, well, he's Kiwi, but he lived in Squamish in Canada in BC. And he came over to visit with his girlfriend at the time. And we got chatting. And he's like, "Man, you've never come to see me in Canada. I've been there for 10 years. Like, you've been here. You got to come." I was like, yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay. So I was thinking about it. Said, "Oh, look, maybe I'll come over for a week." And then literally within a 7-day period, it went from I'm coming for a week to I'm coming for 2 weeks to I'm actually quitting. I'm actually giving in my notice to my apartment. I'm coming to see you for 2 weeks. And then I'm going to South America for 5 months before I go back to New Zealand for a wedding 6 months time from now. And it literally happened in a week. And then people go, "Well, how did you make that quick decision so quick?" And it actually, the seeds of this were planted way back in 2001 or 2 when I did that personal development training, and I was thinking about what my dream would be and what I would do with my life ideas. And one of them was learn Spanish, go to Spain, get good at Spanish, go to South America, because I'd always been fascinated by South America, have Spanish up my sleeve, and spend 6 months or a year living there and traveling around and have a great time. Now, that never happened. I did some Spanish but it took me 8 years later for me to actually go, you know what, here's my opportunity. And because I'd already put thought to it many years before, and what's become prevalent in my life is ideas gestate often for quite a while. And then when the timing is right, it's a really quick decision because I've already been thinking about it for years. Mm-hmm. And it sort of morphs into a different sort of shape or form, but it's ready to go. And so it was so easy to make that decision. It was like, you know what, I don't need to be here. I've got some cash. I always wanted to do this. And literally it took 7 days, and I was noticing I hired a Spanish tutor who was a Venezuelan journalist who'd been asked to leave his own country for various reasons. And he came in, and I got a month Spanish lessons from him, put in my stuff into storage, and literally flew out the country with just a backpack. Turned up in Squamish at my cousin's place, and that's just one of the adventure capitals of the world for outdoor sports. And so I went mountain biking for the first time on Whistler Mountain, which is like, top 5 places in the world to go mountain biking. And it was the first time I'd ever done that. We had all sorts of fun, and I just decided on that trip, I said I was going to be the yes man to anything outdoor adventure. I don't know if anybody's ever heard, there's a book from Danny Wallace called The Yes Man. They made it into a film with Jim Carrey, and he just says yes to everything. So I love the book. It's the humor of it and the style of it is very much me. And so I decided I would say, if anybody offered me some outdoor activity while I was on that trip, I would just say yes to it without thinking, and I would just do it. So we were doing all these things. That started, I ended up in South America. My Spanish was shit. It was hopeless. But the best thing my Spanish teacher did was he introduced me to his mate in Lima, where I landed, who picked me up at the airport, took me to a hostel, and then introduced me to his cousin. And I just had this wild first couple of days in South America with these guys who showed me such an amazing time. And we all got on so well. And so that just kicked off the whole South American experience. And I just went on for 3.5 months. It was Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina. And it was awesome. I just had such an amazing, amazing trip and time down there. And I had so much time to think. When you're sitting on buses for 24 hours traveling through these countries, you have a huge amount of time to think. Even though I'd had other trips where I'd had 6 or 9 months off years before that, where I'd just taken breaks, this was the first time that the penny dropped, that when I was traveling, my mind was free of any of the day-to-day worries of paying bills and what am I doing for income and so on like that, that my mind was fully free just to wander. And that's actually when some of my best thinking is done. And I think a lot of people don't do that very much because they're days and lives are so busy that they don't have time to actually think. And so I'm a big proponent of that whole take 3 months off, take a sabbatical, go somewhere, just remove yourself from wherever your environment is, because it'll give your mind a chance to think. And that's when revelations about what you want to do, where you want to go, who you want to be, those things start to bubble up. I try to explain this to people, but it's difficult because everybody's journey is personal. If they do it, I haven't heard anybody sort of regret ever taking that break away from their life and doing it. So that was, for me, was that time when I was open-minded, I was having a great time, I was meeting amazing people, and it was wicked. I still remember to this day, I know exactly where I was. I was on a bus coming out of El Chaltén on the Patagonian side, Argentinian side of Patagonia, and the penny just dropped that actually what I loved doing in life was, adventure, travel, and exploration. That was that refined. I didn't think of it exactly in those terms, but that's how it came to me, and subsequently that's what I was passionate about. That's what energized me, because I was working in London. I'd work for 5 years, and I'd get frustrated, I'd quit, and I'd go travel. And that pattern was starting to happen. And I realized that I actually getting out in the world and exploring and meeting new people and new cultures was what inspired me. And so it's just like, oh, okay. So I'd subliminally been doing this for 5 or 10 years, not realizing that I was getting frustrated with city life. And I was then quit, and then I'd go traveling, and I'd come back re-energized and great, and then I'd come back into the rat race, and I would wear myself back down again. And this was the second or third time round that had happened before the penny dropped, and that was my epiphany moment on a bus in South America.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Just to your point about, when we're traveling and we've taken that time from our daily life and the space that we've created in our minds to roam, to be able to be free, to make enough space for there to be new ideas, to be creative, to be able to have things come in even and roll around in there for a little while and gestate, like you were talking about. And I mean, I encourage anybody, even in their daily life, to create that space and that quiet. Things like meditation and mindful living can help you create that space in your everyday life, because not everybody can escape for 3 months, 9 months at a time. But I think that the more you do it, the more you crave it. And then maybe you're more likely to take and I say quote unquote risk of taking that big chunk of time that might seem really scary to somebody if they've never done it before. The idea of taking 3 months off or 9 months off, like what's going to happen in my life? That's a long time. You can build up to it like you did. It wasn't big chunks of time. As you said, it was like a weekend here or a week there or something like that. I love that this piece for you was like this kind of like slow burn through all of these years of living life in a societally acceptable way of doing the job and then escaping, and then doing the job and then escaping, and then coming to this realization. So what did it feel like for you to have that epiphany and then also be like, okay, well, but how do I make that work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I decided to do when I went on that South America trip for the first time was to blog, to keep a record and share a record of my travels. In the past, I'd never done that. I had a million different photos, but nothing ever written down that sort of explained anything. And so I'd started blogging on this, and I was sharing those sort of stories. And so that was making me think a little bit more about some of these things and activities. And when I had sort of realized how I was energized from these travels and the penny dropped that I was going back to London and I was going back into the workforce, and that was eventually draining and wearing me out, I needed to address that. And so I came back from that trip, right, I can't just wait for this to happen naturally. I have to be proactive about this, and I need to go and do more adventures, and I need to have a goal. And so I came back pretty motivated to go, right, I need to go and continue doing this sort of stuff. I arrived back in London with a different mindset, and I was immediately on the lookout for things. And one of the things that I came up against, which you mentioned earlier, was I came across in the paper a link to a company called Escape the City. Came across their website. I spent an entire day on their website just literally going through all the possibilities of where you could go off in a job or volunteer. I mean, they just so many different ideas. Subsequently, I invested in their company when they did their fundraising, and they're still going today, 15 years later. I was going through that and I was looking. I was like, what do I want to do? And one of the things I came across, there was a company called Secret Compass, and they were looking for interns. And I was like, ooh, okay, this could be interesting. Maybe I would have 6 months just in the adventure world, just training. Got down to business. I hired a CV expert and I created an adventure CV from all of my stuff that I'd done. And it was amazing. It was really cool. And I'd spent a few $100 on it. I submitted it before their deadline and they responded back going, oh, yeah, we've closed applications because we've already we've had enough. What? But I was like, oh, man, I put all that time into it. But what was quite cool is the exercise of doing it and thinking. I had two totally different CVs. I had one that was a business bidding and proposal world, and I was bid management and project management type roles. So I was on to about the third phase, I think, of my career by that stage. And I was like, oh, I've got this professional CV, and then I've got this adventure CV that when you look at it, it actually looks like I know what I'm doing. It's like, because I'd also at this stage, off the back of my blog in South America, I'd applied to become a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. The same time my mate had told me about this, he said, well, you should join the RGS. It's an amazing place. And I was like, what's that? I didn't even know about it. That was another thing that this is all in 2011 that all these things were happening about. And I went and I joined and they said, yep, you've got all the sort of skill sets of being a fellow. Welcome aboard. I was like stoked. And I went, and it's like this coolest club in central London, the old building, the history, and I found out people like Sir Edmund Hillary, who's probably one of the most famous New Zealanders ever because of Everest, climbing that. He was a member there. He won the gold medal. There was all the adventurers of the world were there. And that's when the penny dropped that actually I probably should have done a geography degree, because in all of the years while I was doing commerce degree papers, my passion subject was always geography. So it was my elective paper that I did all the way from literally fifth form of school all the way through. At university, I'd done human geography papers, and always this enthusiasm and for it, which is part of why I like the world and the maps and everything like that. And when I came to the Royal Geographical Society, just all of a sudden I felt, I'm at home here. I was 38 years old. I thought, I should have probably done a geography degree.
Welcome home.
It took me 20 years for that penny to drop. And I don't regret it in any way, because I did it as a passion subject while I also did a commerce degree, which actually has given me practicality and earning power and great world skills that have, now that I've came to that sort of understanding about what drove me, I actually had the ability to pay for these things, which is if I'd done a BA degree, my earning power would be nowhere near probably where it is now, I suspect. Who knows? I don't know, but I don't recall my BA colleague earning salary of an accountant.
Funny you should say that, because I did a BA geography.
Did you now? And are you rich and wealthy, Jennifer?
In many ways, in many ways. And then I actually went on and did my Master's of Science in Geography as well at UCLA. And I think one of the jokes that I always make is that, geography is the greedy discipline, because you can literally study anything and it's geography. And I guess what I would encourage, it being your passion elective, you're still a geographer the whole way through, even when you would have brought a unique lens with your love of geography to all of the business and commerce that you studied. Being a geographer is a mindset. It's a lens that we wear, where its heart is curiosity and coloring in, of course.
No, I agree. It all just made sense. I wouldn't say necessarily it was an epiphany moment, but it was just a realization. It was like, oh, pennies dropped again, but I had to have gone through those processes of life to get to that particular point. And it just made me realize, that's why I kind of love maps, and I love how the world works and humanity and its different guises and cultures and so on like that. I'm always fascinated to understand under the skin of a culture, and it's come from that just desire and interest that I don't know where it came from. It just seems to always have been there.
I mean, having looked at the journeys that you've been on, that curiosity for culture and environment and the blood of being a geographer rings truth, right? Which is really about this sort of firsthand personal experience of the world around you in order to create your own understanding of your interaction with your environment, other people, and really understanding that that's an integral part of being human is our understanding and our relationship with the world around us. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about what was next once you were accepted as this fellow of the RGS and you were welcomed with open arms to recognize your geographer status.
I felt like a total fraud at the RGS for having now. I thought, shit, man. Then I'm a fellow, and all I've got is gone backpacking and written about it. I didn't feel like I'd earned the stripes at all, and so I was motivated to earn those stripes. And I came across a book by Fitzroy McLean called Eastern Approaches, he was one of the first members of the essentially what became the SAS, and he was in the long range land services forces in Egypt, and that's where they came about, and his stories. And then he was in Romania fighting with Ceausescu to overthrow, as part of the partisans, to overthrow the Nazis, and it was boys' own stuff of adventure and so on like this. It was fascinating, and that book led me to another book by Peter Hopkirk called The Great Game, the battle for control of High Asia in the 1800s, which was the battle for control of Asia between Tsarist Russia and British India. Britain was ruling the seas in these years, and so nobody could really beat them on the water, and they had control of India, which was the jewel in their crown. France was looking at it in Napoleon's times, but ultimately it settled on Tsarist Russia, and Peter the Great, supposedly on his deathbed, said, go forth and take it. And they figured, we'll go overland. It can't be that difficult. From 1812 through to 1907, Russia went from literally the Caspian Sea all the way across what we now know as the Stans, and finished in Afghanistan, with Afghanistan being the buffer zone. And they, in the panhandle of Afghanistan, the top right northeastern corner, it looks like a panhandle that's on the rest of the country. There's a gap there in the valleys between the Pamir and the Karakoram Ranges and so on, and this valley there in the Wakon Valley, which is only 20 miles apart. And they got that close to each other over that whole period of time. And the history is rich. Guys that were going there exploring, and it seemed to be like the last great environment for adventurers of the world in that time. That fascinated me, allied with a unique trip that I'd done back in 2009, made me want to go back to that area. So in 2009, I was part of the first ever cricket team to tour Afghanistan and play the national team in Kabul, with armed guards, secret mission, approved at the highest levels of government for a village cricket side from Ditchling. And we'd hosted them when they came to visit us in 2006. And so they invited us back. And so this village cricket side went to Afghanistan, had full security from the UK ambassador's security force. And we played a game of cricket in the green zone of Kabul. And we were there for 48 hours. And it was an amazing experience. It showed me what Afghanistan was really like. I fell in love with Afghanistan as a result, and always had wanted to go back. This, allied with the book of The Great Game that I came across and read, inspired me to actually want to go back to Central Asia. And that was where the idea for when we first met, which was my expedition, was the Great Game expedition back that I was working on in 2012. And it took me about 18 months to prepare for that trip.
Right. And I think we met, it was either the RGS or another related event. I can't remember exactly what it was. But
Yeah.
yes, I remember you being in preparation and we talked about filmmaking.
Well, I realized going and doing challenging things and adventure and exploring was inspiring for me. And so I wanted to do something that I'd never done before. I hadn't been to Central Asia. It was a gap in my world map. And then I thought, well, what else? How can I make this as hard as possible? And the history of the great game, the book is fantastic for anybody that's interested in that stuff. And it tells you a lot about the history in the 1800s that is still being repeated today in that region. Afghanistan has been treated as a buffer zone between superpowers for years, hundreds of years, and it's still happening today. It's fascinating, the history and how the human race just continually repeats the same mistakes over and over and over again. The recent withdrawal of the US and coalition forces in 2020, or that's about the sixth or seventh time somebody's left Afghanistan in that nature in the last 200 or 300 years. So, we're not learning the lesson from it. And so I thought, wow, why don't I just go and actually retrace those steps of the book in those regions and explore for my own self. Part of my motivation is that I want to explore with my own eyes, form my own opinions. I learned a healthy distrust of the media back in the early 2000s in a job when I had to deal with the media, and I found out that they weren't exactly telling the truth, and they were led by other political machinations, and that penny dropped for me in terms of awareness in the world and how things operate. And so that drove me to want to go and find out for myself. I sort of challenge people if they say they think they can speak on the topic of a country and they haven't actually been to that country in the first place. So It's like, well, go and explore and find out, because you'll often, I'm sure as you're aware, find out on the ground is a lot different to what you might hear in the media. So all these little things from past life morphed in together and to decide to go and do that trip. And I was like, well, what's the logical way to go and visit all these countries? Well, it's to drive. And so I went, okay, I'll drive. No, I hadn't done any of that at all. I went to the RGS. The RGS have this great weekend that you're probably aware of called Explore Symposium in November in London. It's the most amazing venue, and you get to speak with all of the experts in every known field of the world: polar, desert, vehicles, cycling, rivers, filmmaking, book writing, any discipline in the adventure world. Experts will come there and volunteer their time, and you can just rock up to them and buy them a beer, and you can say, hey, I've got this mad idea to drive across Asia. Is it even possible? Of course, these are the sort of people that go, absolutely, totally is. They totally leave out all the important details that would mean you might say no. But they go, yep, you can totally do this. This was November of 2011. Was when I went to this for the first time, because I'd been a member of the RGS now and I'd found out about it. And it was just this most revolutionary weekend. I do not know anywhere else in London that has the excitement and the electricity of the Saturday morning on an Explore weekend, where you've got hundreds of people coming with ideas to speak to other bunch of people who are experts at making those ideas come to fruition.
Absolutely.
And it's an amazing experience for anybody that's in the UK. I would highly recommend going to that if you have an idea about an adventure, or you just want to speak to somebody who could give you some guidance. I met the experts, I spoke to them, and they all said, yeah, no worries, mate, that's a piece of cake. So I went, righty-ho, I'm off, I'm going to do it. So I started to plan for that, and I guess it was 2012 was when we crossed paths. It was probably about a year later, because I was umming and ahhing about filming. I hadn't driven a 4x4. My mechanical skills were pretty woeful. I didn't know much about GPS tracking and so on like that. The visas and the logistical side of things was off the charts complicated to go through all of those countries. The route changed from trying to go from London to Mongolia, to then China, then to, well, if I'm going to China, I'll go to Singapore. And then if I've prepared and gone all the way to Singapore, I might as well come all the way back because I've got this car and I've spent a lot of money on it. And I tried to get a team together, failed miserably to find a team. And it And it took me a year to realize that I should just go by myself after another session with the expert said, oh, look, if you're struggling, just plan to go yourself. And then if anybody joins, that's a bonus. And in the end, I just went solo, which actually was the best decision. But that took me a year to get to that point, over a year from saying I was going to go. So in that time, I didn't even have a car because I didn't know what I was looking for. I bought a car, which was shit because my mechanic told me it was one of the worst Land Cruiser that he's ever seen in his life. And I was like, okay, shit. So I was like 6 months out or 8 months out, I was like no closer to having a group, a team, no vehicle, not really sure how I was going to do this, in what direction I was going to go. And I was super busy with work. I was crazy busy on back-to-back projects, so I wasn't having much time to put towards organising it. You know, whether it's serendipity, a whole range of incidents all happened in a string of about, a month and a half that cleared the path for it all to come together. The first one was the RGS had another little summer soiree, and I got to meet up with all the same experts again. And I told them where I was, and they just said, forget about that. Don't worry about the team. Get a car, break a plan, and just go. And so that restructured my whole approach. Mm-hmm. So I gave up worrying about other people coming, but I put it out there. It didn't happen. And then literally about a month later, a car appeared from my mechanic. It turned out that it was a truck called Boris the Beast, a 1994 Land Cruiser, which had been the very first vehicle that the mechanic who'd started a business and doing overland vehicles had worked on behalf of a military couple who had driven it around Africa for 2 years. And so he already had this history. Was I interested? And I went, yep, straight away. Went down, bought it, didn't even negotiate, just paid what he owed to. I was so like, I need a car. I'm in panic. I need a car. And literally within 6 weeks, I'd gone from not really knowing what I was doing to having a car. And also importantly, my whole work project life changed instantaneously because the UK rail franchising system that I was in fell apart and all of our work got cancelled. And all of a sudden, I didn't have any projects to work on. So I went from being flat out with no idea what I was doing to having all the time in the world and a plan. This only came about 6 months before I left. 6 months, pretty full time, working a few days a week. My boss was really helpful and gave me a couple of days of income, and then working to prepare to go. And it was at that particular point in time, I think we crossed paths around filming, because I was going, I've already got enough challenges. Do I want to add filming to this as well? And I was like, oh, this is my chance. I'd always have a love and a passion for film and TV, and always wanted to be involved in a film in some way. And I thought, here's my chance to make one. I wonder how hard that'll be. Yeah. That had the single biggest impact on that entire journey, was that decision to film. Yeah. In terms of my time and my effort and my mindset for that entire thing, as if the trip itself wasn't challenging enough in terms of logistics and driving, meeting people and dealing with car problems and so on like that. I was trying to film the whole thing with no experience.
Which is actually the perfect place to start, because you can hideously overcomplicate film as well. Once again, it's like I was talking about earlier with having that geographer's lens. The same with filmmaking. When we put that lens there to say, okay, everything that I do has the potential to tell this story in a way that will resonate with people. And when they watch it, it can also be really exhausting because you are constantly trying to capture it all. There can be something that can get lost in terms of being present with your experience as well. I think there's a lot of different dynamics to filming expeditions or big trips in general, which I think could be a whole other podcast episode.
What not to do.
Don't overfilm, because you'll come home and have 60 hours of footage.
I came back with 200 hours of footage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you're panicking the whole time saying, am I filming enough? Am I filming enough?
Yeah, pretty much. I lived with cameras on my body for 24/7 for 9 months while I was on that trip.
Yeah, but I'm glad that you did it because I remember when you came back, and this is something that also I think is, you sort of hinted to it earlier when you were talking about why it's so important that we have personal hands-on experience going to different places before we form any kind of opinion from secondary sources. What I think is so important about, especially film made by individuals who are going places and are doing it not because they're experts at it, but because they want to tell the story. There's something really beautiful about independent amateur film that I really enjoy because it's just raw storytelling. There's no agenda necessarily. But the other piece about travel that I think is really important, especially if you're going traveling with some kind of a purpose, in inverted commas, whether it's research, filmmaking to tell a story, the flexibility that's necessary for all of that to go out the window when you're actually there. I've had this time and time again where I think I know what's going to happen on this trip, or I think I know what I want to capture, the pieces of the story that I want to tell. And I remember for you, part of your storytelling when you came back was you kind of had a similar experience and that you had ideas of what you wanted to communicate with this film. But one of the things you really came back with, which I thought was so beautiful and something that I would love for solo adventurers to hear, especially, is the kindness of strangers. So I'd love if you wouldn't mind to just reflect a little bit on that part of the journey.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, no, like I had visions of grandeur with my filmmaking, that how hard could this be? And it would be a piece of cake before I left. You know, I didn't really have a clue what I was doing, but I did some training with like an outdoor adventure film operator that I'd met at the RGS, again, another source of great things. And I did a 2 or 3 days training, and he sorted out, told me what I needed for equipment, and transformed my entire production by having that little bit of training and just showing me what I didn't know that I didn't know. And I'm always grateful for him doing that. He'd like doubled my budget and my entire expenditure, but improved the quality. And I had an idea. So we talked about narrative, and we talked about going back to Afghanistan again as part of the cricket. And that was a big pull for me. And he's like, oh, that's it. That's your story. You know, you're going back, you're going to meet these people again and so on. So he prepped me pretty well. And with the truck, I had lots of cameras to film and everything like that. I headed off pretty damn nervous when I left, and I just sort of slowly grew into a pattern and a routine, and I started filming and capturing sort of stuff. And, you know, I had this idea that I would retell the story of the great game, you know, of me exploring. Unfortunately, about a month before I left, I was beaten to the punch by Rory Stewart, who's a former UK MP and a far better storyteller, where they had a whole production crew who went and did exactly the same thing. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I won't be telling that story again. And so then it just became, well, let's just see how it would unfold. And it became, I didn't have a set agenda. I had a rough idea of things, and I knew what I wanted to capture, but it was really became just capturing the story of my personal journey. My journeys now have to have a purpose to them. They need to be, they're not just go to Spain for the weekend and have some wine or something like that. There needs to be a reason why I'm going, with a purpose to it. And I very much wanted to explore these areas and to meet the people. You know, I asked the question of, was that region actually safe? And it's a common trait. I'm always trying to disprove. Everybody thinks that places are actually on fire and the world is falling apart, and that's very much not my experience. And so I asked, you know, was Central Asia safe? And everywhere I went, people were helping me all over the place. The car was breaking down. Some of my best experiences was when Boris, the truck, Boris the Beast, broke down, and I'd have to try and navigate getting him fixed in a location on the Tajik-Afghan border, for example, when nobody spoke English. and Google Translate wasn't any good back then, so you couldn't use that. They became the most meaningful experiences because people just wanted to help you. They fed me and they housed me when I needed it. And everywhere I went, it was just constantly meeting new people. And they were always brilliant. It were the people that always pissed me off were other Western travelers who have Western demands of, this isn't like this in our country. Why can't it be like this? And you're going, the purpose that you're here is to experience what their culture is like and how they live. So everywhere I went on that trip, I was helped by locals all the way along. it only ever bit me in the ass, that approach to trusting them. And I put my trust in them every time. And it only really failed when my gearbox failed in Iran. And that was not because of a desire for them to help. It was because they didn't have any parts because of economic sanctions on Iran, and they couldn't fix my car. And I ended up pushing him over the border into Turkey because I couldn't drive him because the gearbox was buggered. But they still helped. They did everything in their power, the Iranian people, to get me to my destination. And, everywhere you go, and I've always experienced it. Yes, you have a few bad experiences from time to time, but vast majority of them, are all very positive.
I'm wondering if that leads us well onto your current project, because it's really about not just the traveling around, but it's really about the purpose behind what you're doing, reconnecting people, as well as raising awareness and raising funding. So I would love to hear, and I'm sure the listeners would love to hear too, what's this current project? How did it come about, first of all? Bring us on this new adventure with you and what you've been doing and what the purpose is behind it.
Sure. So I came back from Central Asia in early 14, and that was the biggest, most ambitious thing I'd ever done. The following year, that year in 2014, my father was diagnosed with motor neurone disease. ALS is commonly referred to in North America. From that point onwards, he was on a clock in terms of how long it was going to last. And it was like 2 or 3 years is the average for most people. So all of a sudden, big adventures got put on the down low, couldn't really go anywhere, was going back to New Zealand every year to see my dad and spend time with him because we didn't know how long he would last for. Turned out lasted until October 2022. He lasted 8 years, which
Amazing.
was a phenomenal thing for him. And in that time, I wasn't able to go off and do anything big again. So I was frothing at the bit to do something once he passed. So I knew that I would go off and do a new adventure. I knew a few years into his disease that there would probably be something that had his inspiration or involvement in some way. When he passed in October of 2022, I was on the lookout for what would I do next. And I knew that I wanted to do something bigger than I'd done. Asia was continental. I went across a couple of continents, Europe and Asia, for that trip. And so I thought, well, how can I beat that? I was on the lookout for a methodology or a way to do it. And I was in the Galapagos Islands in January of 2023. We stopped in this bay called Post Office Bay in Isla Floriana, which is one of the islands. And we stopped at a post box. It's a whiskey barrel that's just been on this beach since 1793. And sailors and whalers used to use this as an ingenious way to put their mail in there when they were away on multi-year voyages. And anybody sailing past knew to stop in there to have a look. They could put some mail in there themselves. And if they were heading in the direction where any of that mail was addressed, they would take it and make sure that it got delivered. So it was a great way for mail to get home when they were away.
Mm-hmm.
This tradition is still alive today with tourists going there. And they literally put a postcard into this whiskey barrel, and they go through the letters that are in the whiskey barrel. And if there's any for, where they live, they're encouraged to take them and then ensure they're delivered. And I thought, how cool is this? So I took a couple of letters back to London when I came back, and I delivered them. And it was such a unique experience, just old school, rocking up, not telling anybody you were coming, and just knocking on the door. Hello, and having them go, who the hell are you? And I go, I'm here to deliver a letter. Here's your letter. And then once they see the letter, they're like, oh, and it's come from somebody they know. They're like, and then you tell them where you've come from and that you bought it by hand. They're like, that's so amazing. And you have this very unique experience that helps you reconnect, or actually helps you connect with a complete stranger.
Mm-hmm.
But because of some written text on a piece of paper, it gives you a golden ticket into their life. All the normal barriers that we live with today in society, where we're closed off initially and reserved to new people and interactions, gets wiped away. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant. I search out journeys with a purpose. I love to meet new people. I was thinking, this is going to be a brilliant way to go and meet new people. And so that's where the idea came for the Galapagos Postman Challenge. which is what I started on the 1st of March 2024 this year, and I'm spending 12 months. I went back to the Galapagos Islands, I went back to that post box, and I took 50 letters from the whole globe, and I'm spending 12 months delivering them by hand across all 7 continents.
And I love what you said about the golden ticket into their lives. Yeah. I was thinking about that slideshow you were talking about earlier for your aunt. And I'm sure over the years you've done your own fair share of slideshows.
Yep.
That people, I don't know, maybe they were bored, but there's always this sort of saturation point for your loved ones when you're really excited about something that you've come back from and you tell all the stories and they're like, okay, we get it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I was thinking about, all of these people, the 50 letters from across the world where they probably went home, shared their stories about this trip, shared their passion, their excitement for what they experienced with their loved ones. And then out of the blue, however long later, right? Like some of these postcards, I don't know how long they were in there for, but I'm thinking maybe they were there for quite a long time. All of a sudden, the people that went on that journey too get this fresh burst of energy, being reminded about this trip that they had, and you're the link that brings it all together. So yeah, I can imagine that there is this real magic that's created in that moment when you arrive on the doorstep.
Oh, I love it. I've become addicted to it now. It's such a unique experience. Some of the letters haven't been there very long. They don't stay there. The turnover in the letterbox is really quite high because of the volume of people that are visiting every day, putting letters in and then taking a few out. The trend that I'm seeing is that people are taking the letters out. Some of them are never being delivered and are being forgotten about and put in drawers with the best intentions and never make it back. Others, a lot of people actually take it home and then rather than deliver it by hand, they put a stamp on it. And they put it in the post box. And I'm like, oh, that's not the tradition. You're missing out. Because I now know from having delivered them in person, the experience is off the charts, and it's such a wonderful occasion because you're learning the stories of the people involved in the letters, not just the recipients, but the senders as well, and everybody involved in it. And some of the stories are unbelievable. And they just open up and tell you. And it's just like, I can say, can I ask you a few questions? They're like, absolutely, come in, have a drink, sit down. And some of them I've been there for a couple of hours. Some I've hung out with them for a few days. Others are very quick, but I've stayed in touch with all of them as best as I can. And, I have this very rich and diverse group of complete strangers that are now friends from all over the planet.
That's so wonderful. And I'm curious, you said you started in March 2024 and we're coming up on a year. So how is that feeling for you as you are well over the halfway mark?
Well, it's 8 months down now. I just hit the 300-day mark on this adventure. I've done 115,000 kilometers, 73,000 miles, delivered 45 letters. I got a target of 50, and I've been to every continent except for Africa. And I've got 2 months to go. The finish line is London on the 1st of March. I have mixed feelings of one, I'm still loving the journey and meeting the people, and I'm just doing a total year of bucket list adventures at the same time. Mixed with I'm getting quite tired and I'm getting weary. I'm looking forward to the finish line at the same time.
Yeah.
I got a big finish across Europe where I've got multiple deliveries, challenges left, right, and centre for a crazy sort of 17 days as I traversed trying to deliver these last ones. Finishing with, just because I didn't have anything else to do, organising a charity fundraiser party finish line to try and raise more money and finish with a big hurrah. Have you seen the tracking map online?
Yeah. Yep.
So that's all. We've got all the mileages from that and the different types of vehicles that I'm going to try and use to spit out a emissions figure.
With regards to the environmental impact that this trip has had, how do you feel about that?
I am conscious about it. I read an article in the National Geographic that resonated with me around your climate shadow. Change needs to be made on a far bigger stage in terms of business, government sort of stages like that. But what the purpose of this was is that your climate shadow was about actually learning and sharing and speaking and amplifying the message, right? So that more people became aware of it. And so that resonated because I think that's how I could make, a greater impact. And hence, so I'm trying to learn from this experience. People are still going to go traveling, they're still going to go exploring, they're still going to have adventures out in the world, but I can possibly produce something useful in terms of analysis and learn myself. And it's already changing my habits. I have a friend of mine runs Flight Free UK. And so her voice is in the back of my head going, get the train, don't take the plane. So I tried to not fly everywhere. It has altered my approach to this trip, and it's made me think before I do it. So therefore it is having an impact. It's changing my attitudes, and I'm learning more about this. I think we can all do things to improve and reduce our footprint.
Yeah, absolutely. And start a dialogue about it, right? Of these types of things. And so you've got this platform you've created with this trip, which is a great opportunity for people to ask those questions. But I'm glad we did have a chance to chat about that today, and that it's something that you want to explore further in a way that could potentially have some impact in terms of research. And academia can be a really good opportunity for accessing some of the industry and the political choices that are being made. And, you just never know where it's going to go.
One of the things that is so great when you take on a project like this is that there's actually a million side projects to it. There's literally, I've got a dozen things that I've got working in the background, that are both related to environment, to logistics, to the adventure plan, to the awareness of MMD, to the awareness of CO2.
Yeah. And have you found a good amount of interest in what you've been doing around the world?
The goal of this trip, my personal mission was to get out in the world and reconnect, get away from behind the computer and to reconnect face to face with people, which I think we're losing through COVID and social media heavy world we're in. And I just had this feeling that we're disconnected, or I felt disconnected in a world where we've never been better connected, ironically. So I wanted to get out, and that was my mission, was to try and challenge people to get back to face meetings. There's Jennifer, I'll challenge you. If there's one person you haven't spoken to for a while, get back in touch with them. You've been meaning to do it. You'll love it. The inspiration for this was my father and his battle with MMD, and the fact that he sufferers with ALS and MMD lose their ability to communicate. They can't speak. And their bodies shut down, so their mobility goes. They're quintessential elements of anybody who's an adventure and travel and exploration. And so I'm trying to raise awareness for their organisations around the world, so people understand the disease better, and then trying to raise funds for it as well. And every country that I go through, I've been trying to contact their local MMD or ALS organisation to meet with them, find out what they're doing. And then because of the unique nature of this trip, media interest has been high, been contacting news outlets, TV, radio, podcasters as yourself, to help share the story on a big awareness drive to try and share what we're doing. And I've had TV and radio come along on live delivery, captured the moments when we've turned up and knocked on people's doors. On my Instagram page, it's Big O Adventures on Instagram, you can see all of the videos of all of the interactions that I've had, some that I've made myself and others that have been made professionally by media organisations. And they're such wonderful memories from this, that you can see the goodness out in the world from supporting something of this nature.
It's interesting, just in the hour and a half that we've been talking, and we've gone over your life from day dot to now. And just from listening to you speak, I can see actually how much of an impact your dad has had on your life.
he was a big part of it. It's sad that he's not here anymore, but this has been this last year or so working on this project, with a chance to do something with him as the inspiration, has been a really nice way to sort of pay a little tribute to him and his life, and remember him in a positive way and do something nice in his name. He asked me to donate $100 to MMD Society that had looked after him here in New Zealand and supported him, and I just decided I'd add a few zeros to that and aim for 100,000 instead.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so grateful that we've had this time together today. I've really enjoyed adventuring with you, going all over the world. I'm grateful that our paths crossed in person, even though if we are on video today, because we're on
Yeah,
opposite sides of the planet. Really enjoyed hearing just about your life and how things have led to each other and connections, and all of your reflections on how important it is that we go out into the world with this awareness of our need to explore and be curious, and that there's always things to be learned, and that when we make that space to allow life to kind of guide us a little bit, there's a lot of gift and a lot of give that's possible when we decide to let go a little bit.
yeah. Look, your life can take you in wonderful directions if you're let it sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you briefly touched on it, the charity that we're going to be donating to with the recreation donation this month. But I'd love if you could just tell me a little bit more about MND New Zealand.
Sure. So mmd.org.nz is the organisation in New Zealand that supports everybody affected by motor neurone disease in New Zealand, and they're doing a fantastic job. They're a charity. They don't really have any government funding. It's all, contributions from fundraisers like myself doing these things. There is also a lot of support in New Zealand in the medical fraternity for helping people with challenges, but it's not specifically at MMD. It just falls within that bracket. But they're doing an amazing job to try and provide support, as is all the organisations around the world. And Canada is amazing. I met the CEO there and their team, and they were fantastic in what they've been doing. So ALScanada.org, I think it is, in Canada, and ALS.org in the US. There's also big MMD Association in the UK, MMD Scotland, Ireland, Japan. I've been meeting all of these amazing places around, and they're all trying to do their best to provide care, because there isn't a cure for this. It's going to take a long time. There's money is going into research, but there's a lot of time and effort being put into care for people, and not just the sufferers, but also the extended families and how it affects them, and supporting them along the way with equipment or just a shoulder to cry on, or somebody to talk to help provide information out there about how do you deal with this, what might it do. It's such a unique disease because there's so many different variations to it. It's not just one form, and so finding a solution for it is going to be complicated. But there's a lot of people out there volunteering their time around the world to try and change this, which is heartwarming to see.
Well, I'm really grateful that you chose this as your charity, and I look forward to supporting it. And the links will be in the show notes for anybody who also would like to donate. I'm just really grateful to and honored to have heard your journey, and also to have heard about your dad's journey as well, and to be able to honor his ask of you of the $100. I will do that.
Yeah,
And
you're gonna hit his target, Jen. And we'll get to ask everybody else around the world to just to top it up.
absolutely. And I always have one final question that I ask of all the guests.
Go for it.
Okay. What do you think is the meaning and purpose of life, the universe, and everything?
Life, the universe, and everything. Ah, I'm not sure I've got anything scientific or anything. I think it's trust your gut, live your life, do the things that make you happy. We've evolved on this planet, and the human race is both wonderful and quite disturbing at the same time, but my experience is the vast majority of the planet and the people here are good, and that's not really reflected in the way we see it in the media. I have a bit of a personal bugbear with how the media presents the world, because it's not my experience from traveling around in the world. So I think we're here to, people just want to hang out with their friends, their family. They want to have a good time. They don't really want stress. They want to put food on the table. They want to enjoy their time here. And we get distracted from doing that sometimes. But that's predominantly the human race in almost in a nutshell, capable of doing the most amazing things and the most dastardly things at the same time. But that the negative side is a lot smaller than you might think, and the positive side is quite fascinating. And that's what I've learned from traveling. I get my purpose as I've gone out there to try and explore and understand and learn about the world myself firsthand, rather than taking it from somebody else. So get out there, explore, meet people, be curious. The universe is an amazing place, and there's lots of positivity out there.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time today, John.
You're welcome, Jen. Lovely to talk to you.
This month's Recreation donation is in support of MND New Zealand. As you now know from exploring with John and I in this episode, this charity works to make time count for people affected by motor neuron disease. They offer personal support, advocacy, education, and also make further research possible. Their vision is a world where everyone who faces MND, ALS, is empowered to live with dignity and hope, a future where it is treated, cured, or prevented. Whether you can volunteer your time, money, or your voice, we hope you'll head over to our website to find out the different ways that you can support their unique version of recreation for the world. Please take the time to let us know what the stories we explored in this episode meant to you. And if you do take action to support this month's cause, thank you. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Recreation to Recreation. If you or someone you know has a unique and inspiring story to tell, make sure to reach out so we can share it with the world. Until next time, keep experiencing, keep expanding, and keep exploring.